lots of stuff coming out of this round of footy, and we want to have a look at it in a moment. Yeah. Let's go to the Premiership window. I'm not going to do the walk and talk, Brownie, because that's a sort of half-yearly thing, but... I mean, if you can remember, initially it was Essendon that were up in that Premiership window. Right now, that's two. It's Collingwood and it's the Melbourne Footy Club. The Cats, the #1 offensive side in the competition now. The Saints are the interesting one, so they maintain their #1 rating as the best defensive team, but just dropped off. Sliding left ever so slightly. And I guess the Dogs, remember we first did it, they were down in that bottom left-hand corner, which is where you don't want to be.
Well, and Geelong have popped up in the last sort of 5 or 6 weeks. Their offence is really on a flyer. Hawkins and Cameron on their way with the smalls around. And the other two that probably Sydney have dropped away a little bit, and Port Adelaide have started tracking towards that Premiership window.
Yeah, they have. Well, it's good. There's a few teams just lining up there, heading in the right direction, aren't they? Adelaide and Brisbane were there as well. So, and that's obviously what we're going to talk about, a few of the chances as we start now. You know, after 8 weeks, you start to get an idea, don't you, guys? You can't absolutely declare people the third of the way through the season, but I think things start to line up.
Brisbane, Geelong and Melbourne were the 3 teams in that window at this time last year. So it's interesting. It is a third of the way through it, and we thought we'd have a look at the way that Geelong tracked last year. Chris Scott said something to us really early in the piece last season that became a bit of a catch cry throughout the year, and that was that they'd been strong contenders at the end of seasons for a long time and hadn't been able to get the job done, and you know they deliberately just changed it up a bit. They weren't as concerned, but they wanted to peak at the right time was the basic premise, and they not only did it, they did it to absolute perfection, to the point where they blew Sydney away in the last game of the year. So we wonder now, we're looking at teams who, you know, we're trying to work out, is there a clear standout? Well, there's not really, because for whatever reason, you know, teams have started and stopped, and I don't reckon it's overly worrying them. And we use Geelong as the example again. A 0-3 start, their eyes very much on the ball. They're back in contention. This time last year, we were all sitting here on this couch. Melbourne were 8-zip and flying. Everyone in the footy world said how good they were, 4 goals ahead, and they went bundled out, bang, bang, in straight sets. Pretty tired and sore by the end of it. So thought we'd just have a look at this and see whether the other teams are adopting a similar approach.
Yeah, it's a difficult thing to do. Obviously, Bucks, you've had to manage it before with a list, but you know you can do it with an experienced lineup. But look, Geelong have played some younger players, Gaz, but you can do it with an experienced lineup with a bit more confidence. Okay, it's still a risk because you're trying to get the balance right, aren't you? That, yeah, you don't want to be flying, but you still need to win games. The season is a game longer this year. It's a long year, 24 rounds.
Yeah, well, getting your wins when you're not at your best is part of that. And whilst you are doing that exploration, to still get the 4 points at the end of it. And I think the best coaches and the best coaching groups have got the deepest list that they can start playing with that a little bit, and they've got the ability to time their run. And you sort of need to be ahead of the ledger to be able to do that. So I mean, we won't see Dangerfield for 5 or 6 weeks.
So
and they can afford to do that.
Really well. Getting your wins when you're not at the best. And let's start at Geelong. And I think they were able to do that on the weekend against a really good Adelaide side, but they did it without, you know, some really serious players in their team. They're as young as they've been for 12 months. I mean, some of those boys that were running around, Dempsey and Nevitt and Simpson back in the side and Tanner Bruin, still got the job done. So there's one eye to, hey, we've got a long list, we've got a big list and we're going to use them. 10 players under 25. Now, Brownie, to your point, they've also got 9 over 30, but they're introducing talent that comes through here. They throw Sam DeConning into the ruck last week, so there's another sort of string to their bow. They've got 2 big key defenders to come back while they have a bit of a look at it, and Ratugolea is the other one. So Ratugolea goes back. They got Ollie Henry who's not playing, and they got DeConing who's not playing. And this bloke could arguably be the best intercept player in the comp right now.
Yeah, and how good has he been? I mean, obviously he was a mid-draft pick in the 30s, I believe, and played as a ruck second ruck forward for a long part of his career to date. But just you look so strong behind the ball, and I think these intercept marking defenders rely on pressure on the ball, and Geelong have started to get that part of their game going as well.
It's a great thing to do too, because you knew he probably wasn't going to get a game, Gaz, with Hawkins and Cameron there, and they like to play their hybrids in Rowan and Henry came across. So why not train him up in the pre-season as a defender? And as luck has had it, Gaz, because they've had bad luck with injury, he was there and ready to go. So
they're not on top of the ladder. They're sitting 6th, but tick, tick, tick. They're getting games into youth. They're experimenting positionally, and they look great. Where you got, Bucks?
Well, I got Port Adelaide, and they've used the 5th most players for the year to date. So. And what they have shown us, I mean, and they had their worries early. You remember after that showdown, leading into the game against Sydney up in Sydney, Ken Hinkley was gone. and they were no chance. They won that game coming home from behind against Sydney in a close one. Bulldogs in the last quarter, the close one. But what they've done is they've thrown their players around.
Yep.
They've got a hobbled Charlie Dixon, who's holding up a key forward role and competing. He's not able to go into the ruck because he's not ready for it. So they've tried Lysette. He's out at the moment. Tickle, as a young fella, is in there, just holding up an end. Like, he might come good in six weeks when he's given a bit of exposure, or he might prove that he needs to go back to the paddock, come back another 12 months and go again.
And they've got that belief too, like Collingwood, they can run over teams.
Well, I think that's evolved. But yeah, so Burne-Jones started as a back, now he's a forward. Houston's been played in the middle a little bit, going to half-back.
So having a look.
Rosie, Butters starting to take control from Boak and Wines. So we're starting to see some shifts and some evolution.
I think the form team of the comp, Gaz, one of is Brisbane. Friday night they were impressive, weren't they, against Carlton? And so if you actually look at, they're waiting to hit peak form. 10 players played over 30% game time in the forward line.
I love that.
Yeah, it's great.
I love that. For opposition teams, that makes you really hard to play against.
It's a difficult matchup, isn't it? Really no doubt about it. So they're trying to challenge the opposition in different ways. It's obviously sharpening the guys up, but also looking at what's your best unit there later in the year when the whips are cracking, no doubt about it. I've liked the move where Daniher's playing a little bit more ruck. And remember, Rayner started the pre-season, or did the pre-season as a defender. They very quickly switched him back to a forward where he's having an impact, Gaz.
Like it. Bucks, what about the Saints?
Well, Saints have been one of the most settled teams. So whilst Port have used the fifth most, St Kilda have actually used the least. And they've had 18 players that have played every game, but they've lost the fourth most games to injury. That's according to a theoretical best 22. So Max King hasn't been in there for the whole year, and they've been able to hold up without him. Tim Embry's only been back for 2 or 3. Steele's missed a few through the middle. So, and Billings, of course, has missed a large, the majority of the year. So you add all of those up, and their first choice players are gone and they're not there. Now, they might come back throughout the second half of the season.
They're doing it in reverse. They could be doing it in reverse.
Well, it's forced. It's forced, but at the same time, they've been really stable. They've only played around with the last 3 or 4 roles in the side. A little bit, and you had Burns, who popped up as a wingman and was exceptional on the weekend. Now, he might not have got those 5 or 6 games in a row, but now they might have found another one.
And they started to play around with their midfield mix a bit last night as well against North Melbourne. Now, Ross in and out of the centre square, Steele out a bit more of the centre square. So they're starting to have a look at it. The Demons, so we're heading towards the top of the ladder at the moment. Melbourne in second position. They've introduced some new faces into the side, so they want to have a look at those players now, obviously, to see whether they can stack up and the deeper they go. And McVie amongst them, it's maintained his spot while Salen's been out. Their biggest challenge now and what they're trying to work out is their forward mix. We've spoken about it a lot. Simon Goodwin last week said the same thing. We're not settled yet. They haven't settled on it. They don't know whether it's Van Rooyen and Petty. They don't know whether it's McDonald and Brown. So they'll use between now and probably round 16, 17 when you want to start lock it down to find out where that sits. So for me, that's probably the biggest challenge for the Demons.
They found one in Chandler, like he decided going to support Neil Bullen.
Yep. Absolutely. The Pies, they're flying at the moment, aren't they? Well, their win-loss suggests they're flying, but they've used the 6 most players of any side. They've had injuries to their bigger guys. The good thing about those injuries, they're not long-termers. So we look at, McStay, Lipinski, Cameron, Howe. Most likely they'd be guys that would warrant selection to come back in. Probably only got another 4 or 5 weeks on the sidelines. So their injury list's in good shape. The watch for me is Collingwood. I don't know how to look at this. I don't know whether you get excited or it's a worry for the Pies, but their turnover game, which was unbelievable last year, they're 18th in the competition the last 6 weeks, points from turnover. So do you look at that and say that's a vulnerability, or do you think, geez, look at the upside of Collingwood?
Scares the hell out of me.
Well, it just shows you how well they've been defending.
It does.
So to be that low on points from means that you're just keeping the opposition at almost nothing, come back the other way.
Also shows how much depth you have in that midfield. It's a wonderful midfield. There's about 10 guys could flick through there and they're so dominant.
So they're playing that many players, they're going to have a good understanding what their best group is come the latter part of the year. So
well, Nick Dacos, we'll look at him a little bit later, but half-back, wing, middle, half-forward. If you can play multiple roles, you still need crisp. Josh Dacos himself, Pendlebury that goes to different roles.
Pendlebury was awesome on the weekend.
Wherever you need him at the moment.